My name is Emily Parker, and I'm 32 years old. I never expected my mother-in-law to call me a gold digger. I never thought a single sentence could hit harder than a fist. But apparently, words can bruise just as much. It happened at a brunch, an innocent, sunny, perfectly orchestrated brunch at my mother-in-law's place. Everything was sparkling, from the cutlery to her judgmental glare. I had spent hours preparing, not because I wanted to impress, but because I wanted to show I cared. Big mistake. She looked at me over her rimless glasses, tilted her chin like a cat deciding whether I was worth her attention, and dropped the line. "You're a gold digger, aren't you?" I froze. For a moment, my mind scrambled for an appropriate reaction. Anger, outrage, tears, what people usually expect in these situations. Shaking fists, accusations, a scene. But none of that happened. I smiled, calmly, polite even. "Interesting observation," I said, keeping my voice measured, almost amused. "And what makes you say that?" Her eyes narrowed, as if my polite defiance was a challenge. "Well, it's obvious, isn't it? You married my son, and let's just say, your family's background doesn't exactly." Her words trailed, judgment hanging in the air like smoke. I nodded slowly, pretending to absorb her condescension. Inside, though, something snapped. Not in rage, oh no, it was something quieter, colder, sharper. A spark. I realized then that no one actually knew me. No one had. They assumed what they wanted about me because I didn't shout, because I didn't play their petty games, because I, dare I say, was underestimated. And underestimated people are dangerous. Because they're quiet, they observe, they wait. And then, when no one is looking, they act. I left that brunch smiling, but my mind was a storm. The words gold digger echoed over and over, not as an insult this time, but as a challenge. She thinks she knows me. She doesn't, I would show her. Not by yelling, not by retaliating in the obvious ways, but by digging. Digging became my quiet obsession. I started small. I began noticing patterns in her behavior, the casual slips of information when she thought no one was listening. My husband, bless his oblivious heart, never caught on. Friends, neighbors, distant relatives, they all assumed I was the naive, sweet girl married into their world. Perfect. Because here's the secret, the world never suspects quiet people. I started to trace finances, conversations, small inconsistencies. Not to spy maliciously, but because suddenly this world that dismissed me seemed fragile. And fragile things always have cracks. I just needed to find them. And that's how I found the first crack. It was in something as mundane as a charity gala she bragged about attending. She had talked endlessly about donations, handshakes, photographs with city officials, but a minor detail didn't match. I double-checked, researched, and traced the money. A small discrepancy, easily dismissed, but a discrepancy nonetheless. I smiled to myself in the quiet of my apartment, alone with my notes and spreadsheets. The spark from brunch had ignited into something more. A plan. No one would know, not yet, not until it was too late. That night, I sat at my desk, pen in hand, and wrote a single word at the top of my notebook. Observe! The rest of the page was empty. I wasn't sure yet what I would do, but I knew this. The world had underestimated me, and underestimated people are dangerous. I went to bed with a sense of calm purpose, the kind that doesn't announce itself but hums quietly in your chest. I would dig, I would discover. And I would emerge, unrecognizable, to the very people who thought they had dismissed me. Little did my mother-in-law know, calling me a gold digger wasn't an insult. It was a prediction. I didn't wake up the next morning angry. That surprised me. After being called a gold digger by my own mother-in-law, I expected rage, tears. Maybe a dramatic confrontation in the shower where I rehearsed speeches I'd never say out loud. Instead, I woke up calm, focused. That's how I knew something had changed. Anger is loud. It burns fast and dies faster. What I felt was different. It was quiet, patient. The kind of feeling that doesn't rush, it plans. I made coffee like usual, same mug, same routine. I kissed my husband on the cheek as he rushed out the door. completely unaware that his mother had lit a fuse she couldn't see. I watched the door close behind him and whispered to the empty apartment, "Okay, let's dig." People assume digging means snooping, spying, sneaking around, stealing passwords. That's not how real digging works. Real digging is about patterns. You listen longer than you speak. You remember what others forget. You notice when stories don't quite line up. And most importantly, you let people underestimate you. That part was easy. I'd been doing it my whole marriage. My mother-in-law loved to talk, not converse. Talk. She talked at people, not with them. About charity events, business lunches, important friends. She spoke as if every sentence were a performance, every anecdote a reminder of her superiority. And people let her. Because wealth, real or perceived, has a way of quieting rooms. But here's what people don't realize. The louder someone talks about their power, the more likely it's fragile. So I started listening. It began with her charity. She mentioned it constantly, how generous she was, how much she donated, how her name was practically synonymous with philanthropy in certain circles. One afternoon, while she was bragging over tea, she waved her hand dismissively and said, "You know, some people give because they care. Others give because they want attention." She smiled like she just said something profound. I smiled back and asked, softly, "Oh, which kind are you?" She laughed, assuming I was joking. That was her first mistake. Later that evening, I looked up the charity. Public records are funny things. People forget how much is out there, hiding in plain sight. Tax filings, donor lists, board members, and that's when I noticed it. Her name appeared everywhere, but the numbers didn't match the story. The donations were inflated. Announced amounts far larger than what was actually filed. And the charity itself, run by a board filled with familiar last names, friends, business partners, people who attended her dinner parties. A closed circle, a controlled loop. I didn't jump to conclusions, I never do. I just opened a notebook and wrote down facts. No emotion, no assumptions, just facts. The next clue came from a lunch. She invited me out, not because she wanted my company, but because she needed an audience. We sat at a restaurant she loved because everyone knew her name. She ordered without looking at the menu. I ordered quietly. At one point, she leaned back and said, "You know, marrying into this family is fortunate. You're very lucky." Lucky, that word again. The implication wrapped in silk. I nodded. "I am," she continued, unaware of the trap she was setting. "My husband worked very hard to build what we have." Some people don't understand that kind of discipline. I asked, casually, "What year did the company start again?" She answered instantly, too instantly, and she was wrong. Just by a year, but wrong nonetheless. People who built things don't forget dates like that. That night, I checked corporate registries. The company hadn't started when she said it had. It had been acquired, quietly, from a partner who had vanished from the records shortly after. Another name to add to the notebook, another crack. Here's the thing about long-running cons. They don't collapse because of one big discovery. They collapse because of accumulation. A detail here, a discrepancy there, a missing signature. A name that appears once too often, then disappears forever. And slowly, a picture forms. Meanwhile, my role remained unchanged. I was still the quiet daughter-in-law. The one who didn't really understand business. The one my mother-in-law spoke about, not to. At family dinners, she'd correct me unnecessarily. "No, dear, that's not how investments work." I'd smile and say, "Oh, you're probably right." She loved that. Power loves compliance. But what she didn't know was that before marriage, before her world, I had lived in a very different one. A world where people hid money professionally, where paper trails were puzzles, not obstacles. Where silence was a skill, not a weakness. I hadn't used those skills in years. I hadn't needed to, until now. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. Her wealth wasn't as solid as she wanted people to believe. It relied on perception, on intimidation, on no one asking the wrong questions. And no one ever had, because no one thought I would. The first real confirmation came by accident, a misplaced email. She forwarded me something she shouldn't have, intended for a friend. It referenced a transfer, a delay, and a problem with documentation. She panicked when she realized. "Oh, just ignore that," she said quickly. "Boring business stuff." I did ignore it, outwardly. Inwardly, I memorized every word. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because I was awake in a way I hadn't been in years. I wasn't imagining it anymore. She wasn't just cruel. She wasn't just arrogant. She was hiding something. And she had been for a very long time. Still, I didn't confront her. I didn't hint. I didn't change my behavior. That's the hardest part for most people waiting. They want justice now, validation now, revenge now, but real power doesn't rush. It waits until the moment is unavoidable. A week later, at another family gathering, she made a joke at my expense. "Careful," she said loudly, laughing. "She might be calculating how much all this is worth." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. But inside, I thought, if only you knew, because I wasn't calculating what she had. I was calculating how much of it was real, and how much of it would crumble the moment light touched it. That night, I added a second word to the notebook. Under observe, I wrote, confirm I wasn't done digging, not even close. And the deeper I went, the more I realized something chilling. If her power depended on silence, then my silence, my patience, was already a threat. She just didn't know it yet. By the time I realized, I wasn't just observing anymore. I was building a case. It was already too late to turn back. Not that I wanted to. Something fundamental had shifted inside me. I no longer felt like a guest in my mother-in-law's world. I felt like an auditor, like someone who had been handed a flashlight and told, "Go ahead, look closer." And once you see rot, you can't unsee it. Here's the truth no one talks about. Lies survive because they're lonely. They depend on isolation, on the assumption that no one will ever connect the dots. So I started connecting them. I didn't do anything dramatic. I didn't storm into offices or demand records. I didn't threaten anyone. I asked questions, the kind that sound innocent. The kind people answer automatically, especially when they don't think you matter. It started with her friend circle. There were 5 women she rotated through like a court. Lunch friends, charity friends, business friends, and the ones she only called when she needed something done quietly. They all shared the same traits. Impeccably dressed, loud about loyalty, weirdly vague when pressed for details at one luncheon, while everyone was sipping wine and pretending to care about the food. I leaned toward one of them, Margaret, I think, and said casually, "You've known my mother-in-law forever, right?" Margaret smiled. "Oh yes, decades." I tilted my head. "So you were around when the company really took off." Her smile flickered. "Which phase?" she asked. "Bingo, people who know the truth don't need clarification." I let the moment pass, pretending not to notice, but I filed it away. Another crack. Another hesitation where confidence should have been. Later, when Margaret excused herself, my mother-in-law leaned toward me and said, half joking, half warning, "Careful, you're asking very serious questions lately." I smiled sweetly. "Oh, I'm just curious." She laughed, but it wasn't relaxed. That night, I pulled every public record I could find. Company filings, property transfers, shell entities with almost identical names. It wasn't illegal, at least not on the surface. It was convenient, too convenient. Money moved in circles. Ownership shifted briefly, then returned. Losses appeared on paper while lifestyles stayed lavish. It was the kind of structure designed not to grow, but to hide. Then I found him. A name I'd seen twice before, buried in documents like an afterthought. Elliot Crane, former partner, minority stakeholder. Retired. No press release, no farewell dinner, no acknowledgement. Just gone. I searched for him for hours. Nothing recent. No social media. No company affiliations. No obituary. Which meant one thing: he didn't want to be found. And people don't disappear unless they're running from something or were pushed. I didn't reach out to him right away. Evidence isn't about speed. It's about structure. So instead, I tested something small. At the next family dinner, I brought him up, casually. Oh, I was reading about the early days of the company, I said, cutting my food slowly. Elliot Crane seemed important. The room changed temperature. My mother-in-law's fork paused midair. Oh, she said too quickly. He was a minor player. Didn't have the stomach for real business. My husband frowned. I've never heard of him. She shot him a look. Because he doesn't matter, I nodded. Interesting. That was all I said. But her reaction told me everything. That night she called me, not texted. Called, that alone was unusual. I don't appreciate you digging into things that don't concern you, she said, her voice controlled but tight. I kept my tone gentle. I was just trying to understand the family history. This family, she snapped, is none of your concern. There it was, not our family, this family, I apologized. She hung up satisfied. She thought she'd shut me down. What she'd actually done was confirm I was on the right path. 2 days later, I found Elliot. Not online, through a paper trail. A small consulting firm. A single address. A quiet town hours away from where we lived. I didn't go myself. I sent an email, short, polite, unthreatening. You don't know me, but I believe we have a shared interest in the truth. If you're willing to talk, I'm willing to listen. No names, no accusations, just an opening. I didn't expect a reply. But I got one, 3 words. You married her son. My hands went cold. We spoke on the phone that night. He sounded tired. Not bitter, just worn down in a way that comes from being erased. I warned them, he said. I warned her. About what? I asked. He laughed quietly. About building power on smoke. He told me everything. The manipulated valuations, the forced buyout. The threats disguised as legal advice. The charity used to launder reputation, not money, but credibility. She doesn't steal, he said. She convinces people they were never robbed. By the end of the call, my notebook was full. Not speculation, not suspicion, facts, names, dates, proof. But the most chilling part. She knows she's vulnerable, Elliot said. That's why she attacks people she thinks are weak. I thought of the brunch, the word gold digger, and I understood. She wasn't insulting me. She was testing me. I thanked Elliot and promised discretion. When I hung up, I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. Like someone who had just finished assembling a weapon they hoped they'd never have to use. The next day, my mother-in-law invited us to dinner. Just the 3 of us. She was unusually pleasant. Complimented my cooking. Asked about my work. Too pleasant. Predators get friendly when they sense a shift in balance. At dessert, she leaned back and said, smiling, You know, I may have misjudged you. I looked at her. People like us, she continued. We need to trust each other. I met her eyes and said softly, Trust is built on honesty. Her smile froze for half a second, just long enough. That night, I added a 3rd word to my notebook. Under observe, under confirm, I wrote. Control, because I no longer just knew the truth. I knew when to release it. And more importantly, I knew she was afraid. Power doesn't arrive with fireworks. It doesn't announce itself or demand attention. Real power is the moment you realize you could destroy someone and choose not to. Yet, that's where I was. I had the truth. I had proof. And I had something even more dangerous than both, timing. After that dinner, my mother-in-law changed tactics. She became kind. Too kind. Compliments replaced insults. Invitations replaced silence. She asked for my opinion on things she'd never cared about before. At first glance, it looked like acceptance. But I'd already learned the pattern. She only got close when she felt threatened. I played along. That's another thing people misunderstand about strength. They think it means resistance. Sometimes it means agreement. I nodded. I smiled. I gave harmless opinions. I became exactly what she wanted me to be again, safe. And while she relaxed, I repositioned. The first thing I did was step back, not from her, but from visibility. I stopped attending every event. Declined some lunches. Let her wonder where my attention had gone. People like her need an audience. Silence unsettles them. Sure enough, she started reaching out more, calling, checking in, fishing. I gave her nothing. Behind the scenes, though, I was building something solid. I reconnected with people I'd once kept at arm's length, former colleagues, discreet professionals, individuals who valued competence over clout. I didn't say why I needed them. I didn't have to. I simply asked the right questions, and they listened. Here's the thing about being underestimated for years. You learn skills no one notices. You learn how to sit quietly in rooms where powerful people talk too much. You learn how to remember details others forget. You learn how to stay calm when someone is trying to provoke you. All those skills, they compound. And suddenly you realize you're not behind, you're ahead. My mother-in-law made her next mistake at a fundraiser. A big one. Press, cameras, speeches. She insisted I sit beside her. A message. Look at me. I've tamed her. Halfway through the evening, she stood and gave a speech about integrity, about honesty, about building something the right way. I watched faces in the crowd, some inspired, some skeptical, a few uncomfortable. Those were the ones who knew. After the applause, she leaned toward me and whispered, "See, this is how you command respect." I looked at her and said softly, "No, this is how you borrow it." She laughed, assuming I was joking. I was. The next week, I did something subtle but irreversible. I declined an invitation publicly, not with an excuse, just a polite, visible no. People noticed. Questions started. Why was I there? Was everything okay? Had something happened? I let speculation do the work for me. Then I made my move. I arranged a meeting, not with her, but with someone above her. A donor. A man who funded reputations, not people. I didn't accuse. I presented data, patterns, inconsistencies, risks. I framed it as concern. He listened very carefully. People like him always do. Within days, I saw the ripple. Her tone sharpened. Her calls became curt. Her confidence wavered. She knew something was shifting. She just didn't know it was me. One evening, she confronted me. "Have I done something to offend you?" she asked, eyes sharp. I met her gaze calmly. "No," she waited. I added, "but I've learned some things." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. About myself. That unsettled her more than any accusation ever could. Here's the moment I understood everything. She didn't fear exposure. She feared irrelevance. She needed control. And control only works when no one else realizes they have options. So I started giving people options. Quietly, a word here, a suggestion there, nothing that traced back to me. Just enough to loosen her grip. One night, as I sat alone with my notebook, I crossed something out. Not a name, not a plan, a belief. I crossed out the idea that power belonged to the loudest person in the room. It never had. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was ready. And for the first time, I didn't care how this ended, as long as it ended on my terms. Under control, I wrote one final note. Wait for the moment they think E1. Because that's when they make mistakes. And she was already celebrating too soon. There's a moment in every long con when the person running it realizes something is wrong. They don't know what yet. They just feel it. That's where my mother-in-law was. She started tightening her grip. More calls, more check-ins, more sudden demands for loyalty disguised as concern. "People are talking," she told me one afternoon, stirring her tea too hard. "You know how rumors start. It's important we present a united front." "We," interesting word choice, I nodded. "Of course." She watched my face, searching for cracks. She didn't find any. What she didn't know was that while she was guarding her territory, I was quietly leaving it. Power doesn't always mean replacing someone. Sometimes it means making them unnecessary. My first alliance came from an unexpected place. Her accountant. I didn't approach him directly. That would have been obvious. Instead, I asked a mutual contact for a recommendation, framing it as my financial planning. We met for coffee. He was cautious, professional, clearly loyal. Until I asked one simple question. "What would you do if a client's risk exposure was underestimated?" He paused, long enough. "I'd advise them to prepare," he said carefully. I slid a folder across the table. Not accusations, not threats, just possibilities. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. "I can't be involved," he said. "I know," I replied. "But you can protect yourself." That was enough. People will stay loyal to power, but they'll defect to survival. The second alliance formed by accident. A woman I barely knew, someone my mother-in-law had dismissed years ago as unreliable. She reached out after a fundraiser. "You don't belong in her shadow," she said bluntly. I smiled. "No," I agreed. "I don't." We spoke for hours. She filled in gaps I hadn't even known existed. Patterns of exclusion, reputation sabotage, quiet intimidation. I wasn't the first. Just the first to stay calm. The third alliance was the most important. My husband. And no, he didn't suddenly become my accomplice. He became something more powerful. Aware. I didn't dump the truth on him all at once. That would have shattered him. Instead, I asked questions. The kind that let him discover inconsistencies. "Did you know Elliot? Does that timeline make sense to you? Have you ever wondered why?" He started connecting dots on his own. And when realization dawns organically, it's irreversible. "She's not who I thought," he said quietly one night. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law grew bolder. At a family gathering, she made a point of praising me publicly. "She's finally learning how things work," she said, smiling like a queen granting favor. People laughed. I laughed too, because I knew what that praise meant. She thought she'd won. That's when she made her next move. She invited everyone important to a private event. A celebration. New partnerships, new beginnings, a show of strength. Exactly the kind of moment where liars overperform. I watched from the edges as she held court, basking in admiration. And I noticed something else. She kept checking her phone, waiting, nervous. The donor I'd spoken to didn't show. Neither did two board members, a small thing but visible. Her smile tightened. Later that night, she cornered me. "You wouldn't happen to know why certain people are distracted lately?" she asked. I met her eyes. "No," I said truthfully, because distraction wasn't the problem, preparation was. When I got home, I opened my notebook. Underweight, I added another line. Alliances turn whispers into leverage, because the truth doesn't need to be shouted. It just needs enough people ready to hear it. She still thought she controlled the narrative. She didn't realize I'd changed the audience. The moment someone starts losing control, they do one of two things. They either retreat or they overreach. My mother-in-law chose the second. It started small, a comment here. A raised eyebrow there. At first, only I noticed. She began correcting me in front of others again, but sharper now, less playful. "No, that's not quite right," she'd say, smiling thinly. She tends to exaggerate, about what she never clarified. She didn't have to. Planting doubt doesn't require explanation, just repetition. I didn't respond. I let it sit. People pay attention when tension lingers unresolved. Then she escalated. She started telling stories about me, not lies exactly, distortions. How I misunderstood a conversation. How I was emotional about business matters. How I meant well but lacked experience. It was a classic maneuver. Reframe competence as confusion. The irony. The more she tried to undermine me, the more noticeable it became. People began asking me for clarification afterward. Quietly, privately. The first public fracture appeared at a luncheon. She invited a small group, donors, friends, allies. Halfway through, someone asked about the charity's expansion plans. She launched into a confident explanation. Dates, numbers, projections. I watched faces. Two people exchanged a look, just a glance. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. When she finished, there was polite applause. Then someone asked a follow-up, a gentle one. "Is that before or after the restructuring?" She blinked. "Which restructuring?" The room went still. She laughed it off. "Oh, we're still finalizing details." But her voice was higher now, tighter. The fracture wasn't a break, it was a sound. A faint crack that only certain ears could hear. Later, she pulled me aside. "You need to stop," she said quietly, eyes blazing. "Stop what?" I asked. She hesitated. She couldn't accuse me of anything specific. That was the problem. "I've been very generous to you," she continued. "You wouldn't want to jeopardize that." There it was. The threat disguised as kindness, I smiled. I've never taken anything from you. Her jaw tightened. That night, something shifted. I stopped correcting misinformation about myself. I stopped smoothing over awkward moments. I stopped protecting her reputation. Not actively, just passively. I let things land. The next time she misrepresented a detail in front of others, I simply said, "Oh, that's not quite how it happened." No tone, no challenge, just truth. Silence followed, uncomfortable, lingering. Someone coughed. She stared at me. I met her gaze and waited she changed the subject. But the damage was done. People had seen it, not a fight, a contrast. After that, the invitation slowed. I wasn't included in everything anymore. She thought she was isolating me. In reality, she was giving me space. Space to speak without her shadow. I started receiving messages. "I wanted to ask you something. You seem very grounded. Can I get your perspective? Does this timeline make sense to you?" I answered honestly, carefully, without embellishment. Meanwhile, she unraveled, just a little, but enough. Her voice grew sharper, her patience thinner, her stories more defensive. Power hates being questioned, especially by someone it once dismissed. The final moment of this part came unexpectedly. At a dinner, she raised her glass for a toast. "To family," she said, "and to knowing where you belong." The words were pointed. The smile was. I raised my glass too. "To truth," I said calmly. A few people laughed, thinking it was a joke, but one person didn't. They watched me, really watched me, and nodded. That was when I knew the fracture wasn't just visible, it was spreading. There's a specific sound power makes when it cracks. It's not loud. It's the silence that follows when someone says the thing everyone else was afraid to. That sound arrived on a Thursday evening. The event was supposed to be routine. A private gathering, board members, donors, a few friends of the foundation. My mother-in-law loved these. Controlled environments, familiar faces, predictable applause. She assumed I wouldn't come. I did. I arrived late, quietly, took a seat near the back. She noticed. Her smile faltered just for a second. The agenda moved smoothly at first. Updates, projections, applause on cue. She spoke with her usual authority, narrating success like it was inevitable. Then it happened. A man stood up. Not a rebel, not an outsider. One of hers, longtime supporter. Respected, safe. Or so she thought. "I have a question," he said. Nothing confrontational, just calm. She nodded, magnanimous. "Of course." He adjusted his glasses. "Can you clarify the discrepancy between last quarter's reported donations and the filings?" The air shifted. This wasn't a private question. This was public. She didn't freeze. She smiled. "That's just timing," she said smoothly. "Accounting cycles can be confusing." He nodded. "I'm sure that's why I asked our auditors." A beat. They couldn't reconcile it. The room went quiet. No murmurs, no whispers, silence. She laughed lightly. "Well, I'll be happy to follow up privately." He didn't sit down. "I think transparency would reassure everyone." There it was. The word she hated most, she glanced around. People avoided her eyes, not out of loyalty, out of uncertainty. And uncertainty is dangerous. She answered, but rushed now. Details blurred. Numbers approximated. I watched something remarkable happen. People stopped nodding. Then someone else spoke, a woman near the front. "I actually had the same question," she said. "About the restructuring." Another crack. My mother-in-law's voice tightened. "These are operational matters," she said sharply, "not appropriate for open discussion." A pause. Then the man said gently, "If they affect credibility, they're appropriate everywhere." That was it. The spell broke. The meeting ended early. Excuses made. People left quickly. No lingering praise. No laughter. She stood alone at the front, papers trembling slightly in her hands. She didn't look at me, but I knew she felt me. Later that night, my phone buzzed. A message from the man who'd spoken up. "Thank you for not stopping me." I stared at the screen. I hadn't encouraged him. I hadn't prompted him. I'd simply created space. That's when I understood the final truth about power. It doesn't move people like chess pieces. It lets them move themselves. The next day, the fallout began. Calls, emails. "Just checking in. Wanted to clarify something. Do you have a moment? I answered selectively, always calm, always factual, never emotional. My mother-in-law, meanwhile, went quiet, no calls. No messages, no invitations. Silence from someone who thrived on control is never peace, it's regrouping. At dinner that night, my husband finally said it. She's scared. I nodded. Yes, she thinks you're doing this to hurt her, he continued. I looked at him. I'm doing this to stop her. He absorbed that. Then he nodded too. That night, I opened my notebook. Under weight, I wrote one last line. They don't need you to lead, just to step aside. Because once loyalty breaks, it doesn't come back. It looks for somewhere safer to land. The hardest part about gaining power isn't outsmarting someone. It's staying human while they try to break you. I learned that the week after the boardroom fracture. It started with subtle digs at home. My mother-in-law had always been able to wield words like weapons, but now she was refining her aim. At Sunday brunch, she leaned toward my husband and said, loud enough for me to hear, "Sometimes I wonder if people choose partners wisely. Some people just aren't ready for certain responsibilities." Her glance flicked toward me, just a flick. A predator smiling at its prey. I didn't flinch. I smiled back. But the impact wasn't on me, it was on him. My husband's brow furrowed. He wanted to defend me, to step in and say enough. I touched his hand under the table. "Watch," I whispered. He froze, uncertainty in his eyes. I squeezed. Calmly, firmly. Her attacks escalated. Emails, calls. Friendly messages laced with guilt. "You know, some people wouldn't forgive what you've done." At first, I laughed. Then, slowly, I realized she was trying something deeper. She was testing how far she could push me without triggering retaliation. She was probing my boundaries. And then she attacked where it would hurt most. A conversation with my friends. "Oh, I worry about her influence," she said casually, insinuating that I was manipulative. "Sometimes you meet people who aren't what they seem." A few friends looked at me with hesitation. That night, I sat alone, notebook open, hands trembling, not from fear, but from understanding. The emotional battlefield wasn't about proving my intelligence. It was about protecting the people I loved and maintaining composure while someone tried to manipulate their perceptions of me. I started taking notes differently. No longer just evidence. Now I cataloged behavior. Tone, timing, emotional triggers. It was a psychological map. I was learning her patterns, how she pushed buttons, who she targeted first, how she created chaos silently. One evening, I confronted my husband quietly. "You might need to brace yourself," I said. "She's escalating. Her goal isn't just to undermine me, it's to destabilize us." He nodded. "But I can't," he started. "Don't," I interrupted softly. "I've got this, but I need your trust completely, no rescuing me." And he gave it. That night, as I lay awake, I realized something important. Power doesn't just exist in the external world. It lives inside. And when someone attacks your inner stability, the fight becomes invisible. She tried the old tactic, divide and conquer. She whispered rumors, seeded doubt among allies I had begun to trust. But this time I was ready. Every alliance had been subtly reinforced. Every person I'd spoken to had witnessed her inconsistencies firsthand. No one doubted me now, not really. And then, the personal test. She cornered me in the kitchen one evening, alone. "I know what you're doing," she hissed. "You think you're clever," she continued, "but I've raised people who can see right through you." Her eyes were wide. She wasn't smiling this time. I looked back calm. "I don't need to be clever," I said. "I just need to be accurate." For the first time, I saw fear, not arrogance, in her expression. After that, she pulled back, temporarily. But I knew it wouldn't last. People who wield fear professionally always test limits again and again. I also knew my calm had shifted the battlefield permanently. No more innocent dinners. No more casual events. No more giving her the benefit of the doubt. She had pushed me, and I had stayed steady. And in staying steady, I realized something profound. Strength doesn't scream. It waits. By the end of that week, I had a full mental map of her emotional tactics, her allies, and her weaknesses. I had the data, the psychology, the network. And most importantly, I had control over myself. Under control, I added a new word: resilience, because no plan matters if you break under pressure. And breaking was no longer an option. The first rule of revealing a long-running con is simple: don't reveal everything at once. Give people just enough to question, enough to notice cracks, enough to realize they've been seeing a performance, not reality. And that's exactly what I did. It began at a casual brunch, my idea, of course. I invited a mix of people: donors, old family friends, a few distant colleagues of hers who remembered the real history. She didn't attend, naturally, because she assumed I was harmless. I smiled politely, poured my coffee, and let the stories unfold. I started small. A few factual corrections here. "Oh, the charity event last spring," I said lightly. "Actually, it raised $12,000 less than reported publicly." Eyes widened. A few whispered confirmations. No drama, just data. Then I added a subtle story about the company's early days. "The acquisition wasn't handled the way people usually think," I said casually. "I've been reading through some old filings. It's fascinating how the minority partners were quietly bought out." I noticed the faint flicker of recognition in a few faces. Her reputation, carefully cultivated over decades, began to wobble, not because I shouted it down, but because the right people began connecting dots. Next, I invited a former colleague, someone who had been there when my mother-in-law's miraculous success actually happened. She spoke quietly, almost apologetically. "People don't realize how much was orchestrated behind the scenes. She wasn't always in charge." No names, no drama, just truth. The effect was electric. Meanwhile, I carefully documented reactions. Who believed me immediately? Who doubted? Who asked follow-up questions? I was building momentum without appearing to lead it. The final stroke of the day came unexpectedly. One of her old donors leaned over and whispered, "She always told me one version of events. Now I see something different." A small comment. Quiet. But it resonated in the room. People began whispering, connecting, realizing they had been misled, not maliciously perhaps, but systematically. By the time I left, I hadn't said anything confrontational. I hadn't called her out. Yet her empire, her carefully curated persona, was under scrutiny. That evening, my phone buzzed. A message from someone I hadn't expected. "People are talking." Quietly, but they're noticing. "Be careful." I smiled. Careful, I had already won. The next week, subtle ripples continued. A minor mistake at a charity board meeting. One of the projects she had claimed credit for was quietly corrected by someone else. A former partner of hers, previously silent, reached out to me indirectly, hinting at unresolved agreements. She didn't confront me directly yet. She couldn't. By the time she realized her position was in jeopardy, the room had shifted. Power had migrated quietly, but unmistakably. The morning of the big reveal, I didn't feel nervous. I felt inevitable. Not in a boastful way, not in a dramatic, "I'm about to triumph" way. I felt calm, focused, precise, because everything that was about to happen had been carefully prepared for months. I arrived at the event quietly, a simple notebook tucked under my arm. It was another fundraiser, this time larger, with board members, donors, family friends, and a smattering of city officials. Her energy was palpable, confident, radiant, performing. She didn't see me as a threat, she never does. The evening began with speeches. She spoke first, of course, outlining successes, donations, milestones, and her unerring generosity. People nodded, applauded, smiled politely. I took notes. Then it was my turn. I walked up calm, measured, speaking directly to the assembled crowd. "Thank you all for attending," I began, soft but steady. "It's inspiring to see so many people committed to charity, to business integrity, and to honest leadership." A few polite nods, eyes on me. Then I started. I wanted to share something I recently discovered while reviewing public records, old filings, and the history of some projects that were previously considered complete. I paused. Let that sink in. Eyes shifted. Some frowned. Others leaned in. I spoke carefully, not accusations, just facts. The charity raised funds that, while well-intentioned, did not always match reported totals. There were discrepancies that were never addressed publicly. I didn't point fingers, I didn't name anyone, but the implication hung like a weight in the room. I moved to the next point. The company's early acquisitions were not entirely as they've been presented. Minority partners were bought out quietly. Documentation shows variations in reported valuations. I handed my notes to a few people I knew were key allies. They read quietly. Eyes widened. Some whispered. I could feel her. She hadn't moved. She didn't interrupt. She was frozen. And that's when it hit me. The moment everyone notices you are telling the truth is intoxicating. You don't need to shout. You don't need drama. People hear the truth themselves. I paused again. And finally, I said softly, I want to say that none of this is about blame. It's about transparency. About understanding what really happened so we can move forward with integrity. The room was silent. Tension hung thick. And then the ripple began. People spoke up. Not me, not yet. Board members asked questions. Donors confirmed details. A former partner quietly thanked me for uncovering facts they had long suspected. The truth spread faster than any accusation could have. She tried to respond. Those statements are misleading, she exclaimed, but the crowd no longer deferred to her automatically. They asked follow-ups, clarifications, evidence. And she couldn't provide it, not without contradiction. By the end of the night, the narrative had shifted completely. She was no longer the authority in the room. I was, quietly, calmly, inarguably. Later, when the guests had left, she found me alone. You did this, she whispered. I nodded. No, I said softly. You did this. You underestimated me. You left cracks. And I simply observed them until others noticed too. Her face twisted, not with anger but recognition. I didn't know you were capable, she muttered. I smiled, not cruelly, not triumphantly. I never had to announce it, I said. I just had to wait. That night, I wrote the final word in my notebook under leverage. Victory not loud, not flashy, quiet, complete, unassailable. Because here's the truth. Real strength doesn't demand attention. It waits. And when it moves, it changes everything. The morning after the reveal, I didn't feel celebratory. I felt normal. For months, I had been navigating strategy, alliances, psychology, and observation. Now the world had caught up to me. Calls started coming in first thing. A board member from the charity, quietly, "We've been misled for years. Thank you for your patience." A former colleague, "You handled that perfectly." No one else could have done it. Even my husband, still a little stunned, said quietly, "I've never seen you like that." Calm, collected, unstoppable. And I realized this wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about being recognized for the truth I had always carried quietly. By midday, subtle social shifts were evident. People who had once ignored my presence were now asking for guidance. Small conversations turned to consultations. At work, at social events, even at casual gatherings, my opinion carried weight, not because I demanded it, but because I had demonstrated quiet authority. My mother-in-law tried, of course. She sent messages, attempted to charm, and even offered public praise, but it fell flat. People saw through it. The woman who once commanded attention now looked brittle. Her credibility had shifted. And everyone noticed. At a lunch with mutual acquaintances, someone said, softly, almost apologetically, "I didn't realize you were so capable." I smiled. "I've always been," I said. The words were simple. They didn't boast. They just stated reality. Even my husband seemed different. He looked at me with a new respect, not romantic, not deferential, just recognition. "I knew you were strong," he said, "but I didn't realize how patient and precise you could be." "Strength doesn't always announce itself," I replied. "Sometimes it waits." The best part. I didn't have to gloat. I didn't need to explain the months of planning, the alliances, the patience. The people who mattered, those whose opinions counted, already saw. At a family gathering that evening, she approached me. Her voice was low, polite, almost hesitant. I didn't anticipate your approach. You handled everything with composure. I nodded. I waited, I said simply. Her eyes flicked away. She knew she had lost control, not dramatically, not violently, just quietly. And in that quiet, I found something far more valuable than power: dignity. That night, I sat in my apartment, notebook open. I added a single line under victory: dignity, because that's what this had been about all along. Not money, not revenge, not recognition, respect, integrity, quiet, undeniable presence. I closed the notebook, and for the first time in months, I felt free. Power, patience, patience again, observation, and courage had led to this. The world finally saw me as I had always been: calm, capable, strategic, resilient, and above all, unshakable. The strange thing about victory is that it isn't always loud. After the reveal, after the fractures, after the whispers that made her empire waver, the world did erupt. It simply adjusted. The next few weeks were surreal. Invitations that once carried her signature authority now carried my presence. People asked for my opinion, my guidance, my perspective. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't announce it. I just answered. And when people saw that my answers aligned with truth, integrity, and calm reasoning, they followed naturally. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law withdrew. Not completely, she didn't vanish, but her presence was diminished. Her attempts at charm or subtle intimidation bounced harmlessly off me. She realized, too late, that the battlefield had shifted. It wasn't her court anymore. It was mine. The best part? I didn't need to step on her to step up. Strength, I realized, is most impressive when it doesn't need to be violent or confrontational. I let the evidence speak. I let alliances speak. I let patience speak. And they did. One evening, I hosted a small gathering at my apartment. Not extravagant, not performative. Just friends, colleagues, and a few allies who mattered. No one mentioned her. No one needed to. The conversations flowed naturally. Respect was quietly present. Confidence was quietly acknowledged. I watched, smiling softly, realizing the irony. My mother-in-law's whole life had been about appearances, loud control, and public admiration. Mine had been quiet, measured, patient. And the results were undeniable. My husband came to me that night. "You've changed everything," he said. "I didn't change it," I said simply. "I just waited until the right moment." He nodded. "You've earned this," I smiled, not with arrogance, not with triumph, but with calm certainty. That week, I received a message from a former donor. "Your approach has restored trust. You've done something rare, completely without ego." That line struck me. Because power without ego, control without cruelty, and victory without spectacle, that is the kind of strength most people don't recognize until it's already done. Because victory isn't complete without it. And I realized that true strength doesn't announce itself. It waits. It observes. It moves when the moment is perfect. And when it does, the world adjusts quietly, inevitably, in its presence. By then, my mother-in-law had retreated almost entirely from public influence. Not humiliated, not destroyed. Just irrelevant, and that was enough. For me, at least. I closed the notebook and set it aside. The quiet victory wasn't about celebration or vengeance. It was about knowing my power, my patience, my integrity, and my dignity were unshakable. And in that knowledge, I finally felt free. The apartment was quiet that evening. The kind of quiet that isn't empty, it's full. Full of awareness, calm, and control. I sat in my favorite chair, notebook closed, and thought about the past months. It had begun with a single word. Gold digger. A casual insult meant to belittle, dismiss, and provoke. And yet it had lit a fire. Not a fire of anger, but of clarity, of focus, of strategy. I remembered the first day I began observing. The subtle patterns, the quiet manipulations, the inconsistencies no one else noticed. The patient accumulation of facts, the building of alliances. The careful timing. Every moment of calm waiting had mattered. I realized something crucial. Power isn't about noise. It isn't about domination or spectacle. It's about patience, observation. The ability to remain steady while others flail. It's knowing when to act and when to let the world catch up to you. I thought of her, my mother-in-law, not with anger, not with triumph. With acknowledgement. She had played her role. She had wielded fear, charm, and influence for decades. And she had been powerful until someone she underestimated simply waited. I looked around the room. Friends, colleagues, allies, all quietly respected me now. Not because I demanded it, not because I boasted, but because I had shown consistency, integrity, and composure. And sometimes that's louder than any declaration. My husband came in and sat beside me. "You've changed everything," he said softly. "Yes," I replied, "but not the way people expect. Not through force, not through confrontation, through patience, through truth, through integrity," he nodded. "I've never seen anyone do that before," I smiled. Most people don't understand quiet strength until it's already done its work. Because that's what it had been about all along. Freedom from manipulation, freedom from expectation, freedom from underestimation. The world had shifted. She had been outmaneuvered, not loudly, not aggressively, but quietly. And I had not just survived the storm. I had walked through it, unshaken, with every step deliberate and measured. I poured a glass of wine and leaned back. The night was still, full of possibility, full of control, because power doesn't announce itself, it waits. And when it moves, it leaves the world quietly rearranged in its presence. I raised my glass, alone yet not lonely, to patience, to truth, to quiet power, and to freedom. I smiled softly, because I knew the rest of my life would be mine to shape, calm, steady, and unshakable.